Greetings, Raise community. Brent here, coming in live from the last episode that I will record in Oceanside, California, as my family continues our RV road schooling adventure. We are heading to Scottsdale shortly, and I'm really glad that we're able to host today's guest, Kris Gulick Schaefer, who spent the last 10 years at MIT Sloan serving in a variety of capacities, including Senior Associate Dean of External Relations and Global Programs, before this past summer of 2020, launching her own fundraising, coaching, and consulting business. And I'm really excited because we have not talked about that topic, and Kris is just a wonderful partner in the sector. Welcome, Kris.
Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be here with you today. Snowy day in Boston. So you're lucky you're out in California. Wish I could say I was out in California with you. My son's out there. He says it's a beautiful sunny day where he is. So wish I was there, but.
You are getting your money's worth in New England weather today. That is for sure. Just so everybody knows, this is being recorded on December 17th. And I think we had a pretty serious nor'easter yesterday, at least from what I hear. So I am really excited to host Kris. I have looked at so many LinkedIn profiles of advancement professionals over the years, oftentimes trying to figure out what led a given individual down this career path into this field of advancement. Oftentimes we hear things like, I'd never heard of it, or I fell into it, or one thing led to another, but not when you look at Kris's profile. It's the first time I've ever seen on LinkedIn. Her first position was daughter of president, St. Lawrence University, 1980 to 1987. So you did not stumble into the world of higher education.
I did not. It's true. My dad was a college professor and then a dean of the faculty at Hamilton College and then a college president. I chronicle my life on 13 college campuses that either he was at or I was at. I always joke that when I was little, I had shiny shoes and passed around hors d'oeuvres at, trustee parties and the like when I was little growing up. So, when I went off to college, my dad said to me, major in what you love, because you'll have the best experience and learn the most. And then you'll figure out everything else from there. So that's what I did.
What do you love the most?
So when I was in college, I loved the most music. And so I was a performance major, a music major, and studied voice and sang my way through college, actually. The problem with that is
if I had known that, I might have, prepped you for an impromptu performance on the podcast here.
Yeah, not so much. I mostly only sing in the car now. I sang a lot until I had kids, and then I only sang to my kids. Now I just don't really sing much at all anymore. I actually got a job in fundraising right out of college at the University of Vermont, and have been doing it ever since. So yeah. Absolutely.
So chronicling your life on 13 college campuses, which one's your favorite?
Oh gosh, that's so hard. So, as a kid growing up, it's a very idyllic way to grow up. You are a college faculty member's kid. It means that your babysitters are college students. When your dad's a professor of PhD students, it means, the people around your dinner table are people who are working on their PhDs. It means that you grow up going to football games and hockey games and going to the bonfires on Dartmouth's campus, and going to see the ice sculptures on Winter Carnival weekend and, all the concerts. And you really couldn't have a cooler way to grow up as a kid.
It sounds amazing. It really does.
It really was amazing, honestly. So I would say as a kid growing up, probably being on Dartmouth's campus as a kid was just unbelievable. I sold Coca-Colas in the football stands for $1 a tray. The bonfires and the ice sculptures and skating on Ockham Pond. And all of it. You're learning how to, ski at the Dartmouth Skiway. It was amazing. And then, as a professional, it's also a very hard question. I mean, I'm pretty clear, and I wouldn't say it out loud, the college campuses where I didn't love my jobs as much. The last job I had at Sloan was an extraordinary opportunity. I mean, that was an amazing, amazing job. I loved that job.
Well,
Really,
we'll come back to that. I mean, let's,
yeah,
so you're basically born with born into higher education. Your
yeah.
life is higher education. You're exposed to it every step of the way, from athletics to arts, cultural, students, PhDs, you name it. And you went to college to pursue music, but you came out of it thinking, you know what, I just got to get back into higher ed. I mean, you couldn't even be away from it for a minute, and you made the leap to run the parents fund at UVM. Was that a hard decision, or was it did it just feel like the right path? I
Well,
mean, you must have
so
had the most incredible network of higher education professionals of any college student in the country, coming out at that time. And I'm sure it had to be no shortage of opportunities.
Well, so the stars sort of aligned in a variety of ways. I was a Case Scholarship recipient my senior year. So I attended
Wow.
the Case District 1 and 2 combined conference my senior year in college. And I had a lot of people watching over me. So the whole development office at St. Lawrence University was sort of watching over me at that conference, making sure I sort of made good connections and that sort of thing. I actually didn't know that I was going to go into development, but here's the thing about my parents. They paid for my undergraduate education, which was awesome. But the rule at my parents' house was, we're going to pay for your education, but the day you graduate, you're a guest in our home. You literally can't come home. No joke. Like, they packed up my bedroom, and they did this for my brothers as well. And we're going to mail it to you, like, have a job. And I called home in January of my senior year, and I said, so, I can't actually make a living as a musician. I'm a decent singer, but I'm not income worthy. So I think I'm going to go be on a college campus somewhere. I'm going to go do admissions or student life. Maybe I'll go be a resident director or something. And my dad said to me, honey, development's really becoming a hot profession. Everybody always needs a fundraiser. You ought to go get an entry-level job in the annual fund somewhere. So thus the entry-level job in fundraising. And I would go to the Pelletier Library at Allegheny
Were you
College.
always so well behaved? Were you just whatever your folks asked?
I was so not well behaved. If you were to talk to my friends, you would know how not well behaved I was. I was really a terror, actually. But I used to go to the library, and the Chronicle of Higher Ed was a printed newspaper back then, and I looked at all the entry-level jobs, and I applied at Bucknell and Denison and UVM and all these assistant director of the annual fund jobs, and I landed at UVM with a job on the 4th of July. 5th of July I started, so I had to beg my parents, could I move home from the day I graduated college until the 5th of July, because otherwise I would have no place to go and I didn't have a paycheck. And my dad said, yeah, I could come home for 6 weeks. So
I just saw recently that Pew put out a research report. I guess they've tracked this over the years, of what percentage of young adults live at home, and the percentage of 18 to 29-year-olds in the United States who live with a parent is now at 52%. It's the highest in history.
Wow.
Highest since, I think, maybe not of all time. Maybe it was the 1940s or something like that. But literally we are back to a peak. So that is just a point of reference relative to the bags being packed on your behalf.
Yeah. So anyway, that's how I landed the first job.
Relative to other people that land that first job in development, you knew what you were getting into. Like, you had exposure and comfort with the terminology, the cultures, etc. But at the same time, it's still your first real job. Any challenges or follies or successes from that job that helped shape kind of your career path thereafter?
Well, I had an awesome boss by the name of Pete Beekman, who ironically was at UVM and then went to St. Lawrence. I mean, it's like such a small world. The thing about development is it's an incredibly small world. You need to be very careful to tend all your relationships because you're inevitably going to run into people again. I guess I would say that I just have been blessed throughout my career, both by CASE, which has been an extraordinary organization for me in my life, and all the relationships that that I've kept through that organization, but also just by having some really good bosses who have been good mentors to me, and who were both kind when I made mistakes and helped me along. I mean, I am a type A personality, and I am a perfectionist. And I can remember early on making lots of mistakes, actually. And having Pete just be generous of spirit and a good teacher. I mean, I can give you, I mean, the, sort of one glaring thing that just stands out at me. I mean, it just shows you how old I am. But back then we were just starting a paid student caller program, and we were hiring graduate students, not undergraduate students, to work, and we were paying them $4 an hour. And I was hiring these graduate students, and they were all older than I was. And I was printing out these placemats that had all of the important information that the students would need to, graduate students would need to know to answer any question that an alum might have. I've
not seen those placemats, but I picture them like when you see an NFL coach standing on the sideline with the micro print that has every possible play and every possible scenario,
exactly,
and every possible time left on the clock. Is that what
it's like? And it's got, every gift society and what you get if you were given it $1,000 or whatever, and the names of everything. And oh my gosh. I designed it, and I thought it looked beautiful, and, off I send it to the printer, and it comes back and it has 4 typos on it. I thought for sure I was going to get fired. I walk into Pete's office. I had tears streaming down my face, sure that this is going to be the end of my, end of my career right there, beginning and end, in the first, 6 months of my job. So, these things sort of stand out for you. I also traveled to New York City. I was responsible for 3 reunion classes, and I traveled to New York City alone. I was 21 years old. I stayed at the Barbizon Hotel, which was a woman's hotel back then, in order to be safe. No cell phones. You were constantly looking for a payphone if you were going to be late for an appointment. And I'd never been to New York City before. I'd never been to a big city before. And I flew down on People's Express, a very cheap $19 plane ticket, into Newark, New Jersey, and then took a bus into New York City. And I was meeting a guy from the class of 1976, and I could not find his office to save my soul. And I could not find a payphone to call him to tell him I was going to be late. I mean, I had lots of these kinds of experiences in my first several years on the job.
We've got it too easy now. Seems like that would build some major character.
So, I mean, it was a lot of, I don't know. It was a very different kind of job back then. It was a very different kind of job.
Going from, and I don't know all of the campuses where you grew up, but it seems like it was somewhat oriented in the Northeast. But then you made a leap to Texas, which, culturally very different. I mean, what was that like going from UVM to TCU? You don't always see those two names next to each other.
Yeah, it was a huge, huge adjustment, actually. I went to work for another amazing woman named Angie Loudon. And I went to be the director of the annual fund. I was 26 years old. I had all people working for me who were older than I was, who were all Texans, who wondered, what is this woman doing here? And shortly after I got there, I hired an extraordinary young man named Steve Weinstedt, who helped me turn everything around, because he believed in me and he helped me get everybody else sort of on board. But and I made a lot of mistakes in that job. Unfortunately, you only ever learn when you screw up. I mean, I hate that happens to be the truth, but that seems to be, at least has been my path. But that's where I learned that you really need to take the time to learn the culture of an organization. before you start implementing change, and that every place has its own unique culture. And TCU certainly had its own unique culture. And that what worked at UVM was not necessarily going to work at TCU. And that for me to just presume that things that I saw there that I didn't understand were good, or things that I saw there that didn't make sense to me were wrong, was, that was a rude, harsh reality that I learned really the hard way. And I never made that mistake again as I moved to the next job and the next job and the next job. I really took my time to learn. It's interesting. I had a trustee there who actually flew me in the first several months on the job down to the Georgia Bulldog game, and to show me what big football was like, because I'd come from, the Northeast, where there was no such thing in his mind as big football. He said, even Ivy League schools don't really understand what real football is about. And that was really quite an experience. And, I really grew to love TCU and to love my time at TCU. And I learned to really appreciate Texas a lot, and the relationships that I developed in Texas and what makes Texas unique and special. And I have tons of great friends still today from my years there, because I went from there to Rice University. And so I ended up being in Texas almost 8 years in the end. And I'm tremendously grateful for that. I mean, it really altered my life and my view on the world. Getting out of the Northeast for 8 years was a very good thing for me.
I mean, tell us more about that. What obviously we've got a massive shift in work going on right now, where people are working from, where I am, where you are. I mean, we'll see where it settles out, but certainly there is more freedom and flexibility, not for everyone, but for a lot of folks than ever before. What stands out as being, if you hadn't gone and spent 8 years in a different part of the country, different culture, what wouldn't you know now, or what wouldn't you appreciate now the way that you do?
I think that I grew up really in a very Northeastern, what many would argue elitist bubble. And for me, going to Texas and then subsequently living in Wisconsin and working in Chicago and having exposure to the Midwest, then, there's a lot outside of New England that is spectacular. And I grew to really appreciate the patriotism that exists. I mean, in Texas, there is a sense of duty and patriotism that doesn't exist in the same way. I don't think. There is a sense of, there's a, I lived in a community, you have to be careful when you say some of these things, so I don't want to offend anybody, but, both in the Midwest and in Texas, I knew all my neighbors within minutes of living there. People bring over a dish when you move in, and they walk across the street in their sweatpants with a cup of coffee in the morning. And there's just a warmth, it's just easier. There's just a warmth. I don't know whether the word to use. Now, I will say that I now live in Watertown in Massachusetts. There's a warmth in Watertown that I didn't experience in some other parts of Massachusetts that I love. I mean, I love Watertown, Massachusetts. I mean, there is something really wonderful about this community. I have a neighborhood like I haven't ever had in this town. So it's not all places, but there, for me, having grown up really exclusively in New England, going to Texas was like moving to a foreign country. I mean, honestly, I went to my first 4th of July there, and having just gone to a 4th of July in Vermont that was, scenic and picturesque and beautiful, I go to this 4th of July in Texas, And the theme was that every single military, so the Navy and the Army, their song was played and everybody stood up and, was honored. And it was so moving. I mean, it was really just so patriotic and so made you feel so like proud to be an American and part of this country. I mean, it's not just like not something I'd ever seen living in the Northeast ever. So it's just experiences like that that were incredible.
Yeah, and I think, look, as development professionals and, myself in the space, you certainly are no stranger to travel, but there's something different about, flying in, flying out, right? Flying into Dallas, having some meetings, flying out, flying into Austin, having some meetings and leaving versus really getting to dig in and experience some of the nuance and some of the, unique culture. I mean, look, we've been on this trip with my family since July, and we've had an opportunity to spend, a month plus in a lot of places. And that's enough time to really get a feel for it. And you're right. It does feel like, it's a big country, and there are some just really, really distinct aspects of growing up wherever, one grows up. And it's definitely helped me have more empathy, at a time of obviously great polarization, to at least have a sense of where people are coming from in some regards. So you did make the move. I mean, is there anywhere you haven't lived at this point in the country? Just speaking of geographic coverage.
I haven't lived all the way out west. I
Yeah.
have a son who's living out west now, but I haven't lived all the way out west. So, I mean, I also think it helps you have, I think it helps you be better at the work when you've met lots of different kinds of people from all over the world, because it helps you just, I don't know, connect with lots of different kinds of people.
Sure. So was it hard to make the move from Texas to the winters of Wisconsin and Chicago? Not a lot of people doing that these days.
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, the summers in Texas are not a lot of fun either, right? So every place sort of has its liability,
Right.
I think, right? So Texas summers and red ants and, I mean, there are things about the climate in Texas and, sort of the lack of mountains. And so, I mean, I was actually happy to come back to the Northeast because I like seasons and I like mountains. And so yeah, no, actually, I was actually happy to be knowing that I was going to be raising my children where they'd see snow and all that.
You were comfortable, or at least your whole life had been sort of, it sounds like, this campus to campus to campus, a few years. But when you came back to the Northeast, I mean, that's when you really dug in. You joined Simmons College as VP of Advancement, or at least you joined Simmons College in 1998 and served as VP of Advancement for almost 13 years. What was it about that experience where it was like, wait a second, maybe I can really dig in? I mean, a decade plus, most folks don't have that opportunity, but you were able to do that twice.
Yeah, I think, once you hit, I mean, I would have probably stayed at Children's longer, but my now ex-husband, but husband at the time, had this amazing opportunity to come back to Boston. And so we left there. I probably would not have left Children's when I did, because I had a really amazing opportunity there as the vice president of the foundation. I think once you reach the more senior level roles, it's I would argue irresponsible to jump around. That it really is hard to make a difference if you don't stay for a significant amount of time. So, and in the case of Simmons, I was brought there by the president at the time, Dan Cheever, and he and I had a run together from 98 until he retired, actually, in 2006, I think. I may have that right. And then I stayed on with a new president who didn't actually last very long, and then a subsequent the board chair who became the president. And, I think that once you're in a senior role, there's really an opportunity to make a significant difference. And the longer you stay, the more there's an opportunity to do that. I would argue the flip of that, though, which is, I would say in hindsight that, 10 years is probably about the right amount of time from my perspective. I think some leaders can stay way longer than that. I've seen people do it successfully, and it's been good for the institution and good for the individual. So it's not really a judgment on my part for people who do stay longer. But I think my own hindsight around Simmons is 10 years was probably a bad enough time, and I stayed a little bit too long. My decision to step down when I did from Sloan was that I felt like, I was heading up towards the 10-year mark, and 10 years is about long enough.
What was the context when you got to Simmons and then when you left? I mean, first of all, you got there right in the midst of the .com boom. Not that I don't know how much exposure there was among the Simmons community there, but just broader macro context, it's .com. You go through 9/11, you go through financial crisis, lots of ups and downs, at least in the macro context, while you're trying to drive what was called the Dare to Imagine campaign. What was that like, especially given, I think, all of the, challenges, for some development professionals? I mean, look, nobody's lived through 2020, but for many folks, this might be the first kind of macro crisis or recession, et cetera. And obviously this one's different than the other ones I referenced. But when you think about when you got there in 1998, dawn of the internet to 2010, midst of the financial crisis, what was that like?
So the beginning was an awesome ride. So the Imagine campaign was hugely successful. It was an institution that really hadn't had a aggressive fundraising effort at all. And an institution that by and large was a women's college. I mean, it was a women's undergraduate college. It had a few men in its graduate programs, but most of its constituents were female. We really were trying to take them from nowhere to somewhere, I would say. And so to professionalize the team, to actually hire a team, to go from a pretty small staff to a pretty decent sized staff, was really just a ton of fun, honestly. We set a goal of 50 million. We raised almost 70. Dan was a phenomenal boss and colleague. We just had a great time. I mean, that's just the truth. 2008 was a tremendous bummer. We ended that campaign with success. We did a very small Do It for Dan campaign to raise money in honor of him as he was retiring on the heels of the Imagine campaign. He then, exits stage right. And then we, head into a really tough time for the country and likewise for the school. We end up having to lay people off. And that's a brutal experience for me personally. I've never laid significant staff off in my career at that point. Letting go 15 people was hard. Having built up and had the momentum of it being such an extraordinary time. So that was really, really tough. The school did go on to sort of get over that bump, if you will, and have another campaign. They launched another campaign while I was there. And then I left in the middle of it. And they ended that next campaign successfully. I would say that Simmons is, one of those schools that's in what I would call sort of that hard place, which is, it's not sort of a tier one. It's a really extraordinary place that is, in my mind, filling a niche because it is not a traditional liberal arts college, but is really providing a practical education and doing a really good job of that. Mm-hmm. But it's, less well known. And Because so many of its donors are female, it's got a little bit of a harder road when it comes to fundraising. So it's sort of in a tough spot, but I think it's an amazing, amazing place. And it's got a new president right now who I haven't gotten a chance to know at all, but who I'm told is great. So,
Yeah.
I
So
wish the place a lot.
Local, niche, clear focus.
Yep.
To MIT Sloan global focus.
Yeah.
Like other end of the spectrum.
Totally.
How did that come about? And it just had to be, you've got China, Malaysia, Portugal, relationships with Australia. It almost sounds more like an ambassadorship than an advancement leadership role. Just tell me about that, that leap, the fact that it seems like you just added a zero to everything that you did from a fundraising perspective, and just the truly global nature of that role in a pre-Zoom link away from everyone context.
Yeah. So I was recruited by Dave Schmidtlein, who was the dean and still is the dean there. And it was the job of a lifetime, honest to God. Like if you could say, what's the, trajectory of your career, and if you could say what's the last job you want to have before you sort of decide you're going to go do something different, which is be a coach consultant, like I couldn't have planned it any better, honestly. It was the perfect job in a million ways. It was perfect because I've never worked with a faculty who is was more interested in engaging in the fundraising enterprise. When I asked, would you be willing to do X? They always said yes. Unbelievable. Like nowhere have I worked where that was true. And they're passionate about the work they're doing. So, when they went and talked about it, everybody in the room got excited about it. The alumni are humble and smart and engaged and interesting, and you just wanted to be around them. So every time you were on the road, you were excited because you just wanted to go hang out with them. And it was a program that was philanthropically underperforming. So there was the opportunity to raise more money.
How do you know that? How do you know it's underperforming?
Because there's no way that a place that is turning out people who are as wildly successful as Sloan graduates are, and it was bringing in the revenue that Sloan was, that you could say that those added up. It just didn't. There's just no way that. And even still, I would argue that while we had gone from, a revenue number, it's escaping me sort of where we were when I first got there, but, we were bringing in, somewhere around 50 to 55 million annually, that number could easily be closer to 70 or even higher than that on an annual basis. So, there's sort of nowhere to go but up. And the global programs piece of my job was actually something completely separate from external relations. That was really more about partnerships with institutions around the world. And that was something that sort of got added on to my job after I got there, and was also a lot of fun. And there was just a nice synergy between external relations and global programs. And the chance to do
favorite trip. You had to have some amazing international experiences. Maybe it was domestic, but when you think about just like the trip or the experience that stands out among all others, anything come to mind?
Oh my God. It's so hard to say. I literally had the opportunity to travel everywhere. The only place I didn't go that I really had wanted to go and never got there, honestly, was India. I really wanted the chance to go to India and I never did. But I had some just extraordinary trips to Asia, all over Asia. I've been all over Latin America. I think, not dissimilarly to my sort of experience of going to Texas when I was 26, I had not traveled internationally really at all until I took this job at Sloan. I mean, I had been outside the United States of America twice in my life before I was 48 years old and took this job. And, this chance to really get exposed to the world and the impact that has had on me personally, the way I read the news and the way I understand the world has just been profoundly changed, not surprising. And the people in my life, it's just completely different. But yeah, it's an amazing place.
Well, you wrote, we were catching up in advance of this just about the show, and you wrote in this little questionnaire we had you fill out that very often some of these donors have changed my outlook on life. We recently hosted Jay Davenport, who leads the fundraising efforts at Virginia Commonwealth University, and he shared the same thing. He spent a portion of his career working with donors that primarily were Wall Street donors. He spent a portion of his career in Texas, and it was more oil money, if you will. And then he spent a portion of his career working with Silicon Valley executives. And he just commented how each of those different kind of sub pockets shaped some component of his view of the world. I mean, you shared a similar sentiment. I mean, how have donors shaped your outlook on life? And for emerging advancement professionals listening now who maybe haven't had that experience yet, what advice might you give them in thinking not just about closing the gift or raising the revenue, but also shaping your worldview?
Yeah. I guess it's sort of cliche to say that, this is a relationship business, but, I think that I was reminded very much in my last year at Sloan when I went back to doing just principal gifts, a lot more principal gifts work, that the opportunity to really build deep relationships with the constituents that you're working with, wherever you're working and with whoever you're working with, and really understanding who they are. And asking the questions about what kind of impact they want to have with their philanthropy and who are they and what matters to them, and really trying to get underneath all of that, and being sort of less fixated on checking the box, and less fixated on the quick close of the gift, and more trying to understand what makes them tick and who they are as human beings, because it will drive a more meaningful gift, and it will drive a more meaningful relationship, and it will, so for me, in this last year, the opportunity to really get to know a handful of donors much more deeply, so that I could make a better marriage, if you will, between what matters most to them and what matters most to the institution. We often talk about not wanting the donor to drive. So you don't want to accept a gift for something that, in fact, the institution doesn't want. You also, so you want to make sure that you're, I don't know how to say this the right way. You want to make sure that the donor is supporting something that matters to the institution. But you also, in this day and age in particular, as younger and younger donors are getting older and who are highly opinionated about what they're going to fund, that you're also marrying what matters to them in this equation. And I think that unless you take the time to really understand them, you can't actually really make that marriage well. You're either, sort of driving home something that matters to the institution and you completely miss the mark, or you're representing the interests of the donor and then the institution is unhappy because they're like, we don't want that gift. That's not something that matters to us.
Have you had any examples that you can share of the latter? We hosted Nick Lindy from the University of Nebraska, who said in one situation he met with a donor who was willing to make a significant donation to bring back the marching band. And it's like, we can't bring back the marching band. And so they were never able to get that translation into a outcome. He tried repositioning and being a conduit to other areas around the arts and so forth. Wasn't going to happen. Do you have examples where you've had to turn down gifts, or where you just there's been too much misalignment between what the donor wants and what the institution prioritizes at that moment?
Yeah, I mean, without revealing specificity, I have had actually lots of examples. We actually even had a gift in my last job that we returned, where we thought we could make the alignment, and then it was like, you know what, this is just not working. Like, we cannot get this thing to line up. And so I think institutions make a mistake when they tie themselves in pretzels. And it's never a good idea. But yes, so I have had many, many experiences where donors really, really want to do something that just is not in the institution's best interests. And, I had a donor when I was at Simmons, actually, who was truly a philanthropist. And it's amazing to me how few of these people exist. And that is the person who says, I trust and believe in the leadership of this institution, and I'm giving you this $1 million, this $10 million. You do with it what you believe is best. There are very few people who will say that. We had this amazing donor at Simmons who said that frequently. But most donors don't just give you that sort of blank check. So you do have to find the way to sort of, make the marriage. And
is it because they're so opinionated, or is it because maybe they don't trust leadership?
I think it's
to
because
make the decision.
I think it's because they don't trust leadership. And I think that's because we don't actually take enough time to really dig in and get to know them. I mean, it's interesting. I was listening to one of your other podcasts, and it was talking about, what are maybe some of the advantages of this new Zoom environment. And I at least have noticed this with some of my coaching clients, that one of the upside benefits of Zoom is that where presidents and deans and others have been so busy and not really able to get in front of donors as much, Zoom has actually given us a new opportunity to actually get donors in front of the president or the dean much more frequently, and an opportunity to sort of build a deeper relationship, where you were always dependent on an airplane and getting out there and getting to California to do the face-to-face
and the
visit.
donor schedule and the president's schedule and the boards and the trustees and everything.
Right. Now, if you can do that with Zoom, and people are now sort of more open to the idea that Zoom is a medium where that could happen, you might be able to build a deeper relationship and build the trust that it was harder to come by before. So, but I think
I just caught a podcast with Fred Van Sickle, who's the senior vice president at Cornell University, and he was sharing that he's right now in the midst of closing the biggest gift of his career, and it's been 100% done via this medium. And as much as he's excited about, he's a people person, getting out there, loves the in-person experiences. It's definitely been eye-opening for him, and I think for many who started to see, like, expectations have changed, behaviors have changed. This is a once in a generation shift. MIT Sloan is no stranger to technology waves, but I think that this has just happened so much faster than any other wave we've experienced, from the internet to mobile to social. It's never been crammed into a 3-month period.
Right. So anyway, I do think it's trust. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about coaching. I think coaching has absolutely been exploding in the commercial world. I have not heard as much about coaching in the advancement sector. It is now common. There are certain venture capitalists that when they fund a company, the first thing that they do, they allocate a portion of the funding to make sure that the management team or the CEO has a coach. We've seen growth in the therapy space, both traditional therapy, and now there are all kinds of mobile and digital versions of therapy that have emerged as well. But again, been in the space for a long time. I don't know too many people who've really focused on coaching. I think that professional development in the sector has oftentimes really been about the case conference or the informal or maybe even formal mentorship relationships, that's different than coaching. So why did you feel like there was a void? What were the themes that you kind of observed throughout your career that made you feel like, you know what, this could be a great way to continue to stay engaged with the advancement and broader nonprofit fundraising community and really fill a void?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I enjoyed most about the work, in addition to the relationships with donors and the fundraising, was the mentoring and growing of staff. And I've been a manager since I was 26 years old. I'm going to be 60 in a little bit, just down the road. And I wanted a opportunity to sort of stay engaged in the advancement profession. And when I looked around, so when I would hire coaches in my last job, there is a battery of coaches sort of at the executive level that are hired really more to do sort of management executive coaching. But there are not, as you said, a lot of people doing coaching specifically in the advancement, focused on the advancement arena. And so the coaching that I'm currently doing is really exclusively with advancement professionals, not just in higher ed, but in the nonprofit sector. And it's practical coaching. So it is management coaching, but it is, people who are having issues, brand new managers who are, challenged around that, people who've taken on increased responsibility, people who are having challenges managing up, across, or down, people who've come from outside the sector. So they've been in the for-profit sector and they've taken on an alumni relations director role, and they're transitioning into the nonprofit sector in higher ed, and they're trying to figure out, what is higher ed all about? I'm loving the work, I have to say, really loving the work. And I guess I feel like it is helpful, at least I'm finding that I'm adding value to have an outside voice, an outside perspective. Often I think that the vice president doesn't necessarily have the time for the level of individual attention that some new managers need. And so I fill that gap of being able to provide that additional attention. When I've talked to some of the folks who are running the HR functions in the larger advancement shops, what they'll say is that they would rather spend the money on a coach rather than who would provide sort of, two touch points a month over a 6-month period of time, then send them to one conference, because this is sort of individualized attention over a 6-month period of time. So anyway, that's why I got into it. I feel like there's a value that I can add, and I've been doing the work for 38 years.
So if there's a let's say new manager, or kind of that person you described, maybe they're shifting into a new role, maybe it's a new kind of institution where they are feeling maybe a little bit overwhelmed, or they wish that they had more of a sounding board, how would you encourage that individual to make the case to their boss, to their senior vice president or their HR group, to invest in coaching, right? What would you advise them to do? Obviously, we're at a time when budgets are tight, but at the same time, travel budgets are way down, right? We're not going to traditional professional development as much on the conference circuit right now. Could be a perfect time to have somebody advocate for investment in coaching along the lines of the services that you provide. What advice would you give to make that happen?
Yeah. So I guess what I would ask is, I would ask them to ask, are there professional development resources that have been set aside, given that I was recently promoted, or given, whatever the circumstances might be. I would tell them to articulate to their boss, I'm having some challenges in these following areas, and I think an external coach would be helpful to me. Would you be open to the idea of having hiring someone to work with me for 3 months, 6 months? Usually these contracts aren't for years. They're for 3 months, they're 6 months. Sometimes they're 9 months. I mean, it's not like a lifelong sentence. So
And I imagine in many regards, when you frame it the way you just did, the senior vice president might almost be relieved, where it's like, wow, first of all, you're showing that you are ambitious and committed to excelling. And also, by having gone out and not only found a coach, but made a proposal, it's like one last thing that I have to worry about. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how to say that, but just I could imagine it being a relief even for some of the senior leaders to know that there is some additional support. I mean, look, we're comfortable hiring um, fundraising development trainers, right? I mean, when it's like
Right.
around the art of or the science of raising the money, we have no problem making that investment. But when it's a little bit less tactical and somewhat more nuanced, maybe it isn't as comfortable or um, just as well understood in this sector.
Right. 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 I mean, I think it depends on what kind of professional development budgets the shops have. If they're smaller shops and they really don't have a huge professional development budget, that's one thing. But for some of the larger shops that have pretty decent sized professional development budgets and they're sending people off to conferences every year, those shops usually have the resources to invest in this kind of thing. And I also would say that if supervisors want to see their new managers be successful, investing in them you either invest in them and support them in being successful, or you don't invest in them, and then you're looking at they're leaving and they're not successful, and they implode because they're not good
Yeah,
managers, and then you just got to hire somebody else. So
a lot more expensive than coaching. Yeah.
right, right,
So tell me a little bit about the arc of the relationship. Let's say it's a 6 month or a year long
yep,
standard kind of engagement, new
yep.
manager. What is the kind of first third, second third, third of that relationship look like?
Yep. Yep. So, what I will say is that because I am work for myself and independent, every single one of the relationships I've had to date are all custom developed based on the needs of the client. So there's like sort of I'm not like pulling something out and saying, oh, none of it looks like that. But
Here's the template.
here's the
So much.
template. There is
Yeah.
no template. But I can just give you a few examples based on some of the clients I'm currently working with. In the case of one individual who was deemed by a vice president as having some challenges as a new manager, I went in and did sort of a 360, not a paper version, but talked to a variety of people who both work with, and had a few external volunteers, and then provided some feedback, some themes. And we then met every 2 weeks for 3 months, and then did an assessment about, after 3 months, should it remain 2 weeks, or are we going to go down to a month? The boss and I crafted an agenda of the issues that the boss saw as critical. And then the employee and I crafted an agenda as well. I do a report into the boss on a every other month basis. And there are homework assignments, if you will, okay, as a result of our call today, here are some things you're going to work on, and here are my expectations. And, before we meet next time, this is what I'm expecting you to, think about or work on or whatever. And then I make myself available between calls. So I'm in the middle of a bit of a fire with one of my clients right now. And, I was on the phone with her last night. I was on the phone with her this morning, I'm on the one hand, it's like every other week, but when there's something going on, I make myself available. So, it really there's no sort of, I don't know. There's no standard sort of, this is what it looks like. It really is, which is why, in the end, I'm going to take on only as many clients as I can serve the way I feel like it's the right way to serve a client.
Yeah. Well, I think we've often had guests talk about over their career how much the sector has professionalized, right? We hear about the professionalization of advancement all the time. And it's only natural that in that professionalization, there should be a much more robust network of coaches like yourself who, again, it's not just I'm going to teach you how to make an ask. It's much more, I'm going to teach you how to build a career. I'm going to help you navigate the people issues that ultimately tend to be a lot more challenging than the tactical, how do you make the ask, or how do you do the proposal. So I think it's super interesting, and I'm hopeful that our audience finds it valuable. One last theme that I want to get your perspective on before we wrap up is, I saw that you were a member of Women in Development of Greater Boston for over 20 years. You've referenced, being a young woman in a leadership role early in your career. Just tell me a little bit about your perspective on, you've also talked about women as donors, right? Largely through the collaboration at Simmons, but just what's your perspective having, joined the sector when you did, having seen the shift in philanthropic power, if you will, but then also the professionalization and just emerging as a female leader in what has been historically maybe more male dominated, at least in the leadership ranks.
Yeah, in the leadership ranks, it still is actually. Many of the vice president roles are still held by men, although most of the development shops are women now. I mean, very hard to find male candidates actually for jobs. I think when I left Sloan, there were maybe 7 men out of a staff of 55 or something like that. My experience at Simmons was a good one because gave me an opportunity to really work with a lot of female donors, which I had not really had that opportunity. And the balance of male and female donors at Sloan is actually more balanced than one might think. But I have had quite a run, and I have never felt at any point like my gender has been an inhibitor to my success. I wish that there were more men in the field, just like I wish there were more people of color in the field. And I wish we could attract both more men and more women, more people of color to the field. And I wish that more women, although I think more and more and more, this huge gift by Jeff Bezos' ex-wife is
Mackenzie Scott.
Mackenzie Scott is awesome. More and more women are, becoming some of the largest philanthropists in the country, which is great. So, I'm not sure, I have anything more profound or meaningful to say than that. I just have never, ever, ever felt that it was in my way, me personally. I do find that the workplace itself is not as balanced as I wish it was, and I think that as a result, there is a resulting challenge in the workplace because there's not more gender balance that, would be nice if there was. But outside of that, I don't know that I have anything particularly profound to say about it.
Well, closing thought then, when you think forward, you've experienced a lot, you've lived through different cycles, worked through different cycles. We're now obviously in the midst of incredible change, but what's the next step for the sector? When you think about the advancement space, what does the future hold? The next 3 to 5 years, that if you were, in that senior leadership role inside a shop, you'd really be focused on knowing what you know now?
I think that, interestingly, I think that this pandemic has actually given us the exact opposite of what people think, which is that I think people think that this inability to travel and be in front of people has created a distancing or that we're not going to be in front of each other, and therefore it's going to be depersonalized or something. But I actually think that it has created an opportunity for us to be even more personal. I think that it has reshaped how we're going to prioritize the work, because we will be forced and have been forced to determine sort of what really matters. So I think, in the midst of a crisis, you sort of say, oh my gosh, sort of all this stuff we used to do, now all of a sudden, like you didn't have reunion last year. Okay, well, so what does reunion have to look like? Like now we have permission to actually not do reunion the way we've always done reunion. Like now it's like we've been given permission in a million different ways to rethink the work. So I feel like we now have permission in so many ways, like all these events that have just always been done the way they've been done. Now we have permission to not do them anymore. All these institutions have built up capacity to do virtual activities in a way that they never had capacity to do virtual activities. And they've learned both how to do them right and wrong. They've learned that sort of really large virtual events don't work. People sign up, but don't show up because at the end of the day, they're sick of being on Zoom all day. So they'll RSVP, but then not show. But they've learned that the smaller Zoom things actually do work because they're going to be seen. And, so like everybody's learning through these lessons. And I think that there's a way and an ability to be sort of more personalized because of the thing we talked about earlier, right? So the president can actually have these Zoom connections with people and actually people can feel more connected, even though they're far away, and it doesn't have to be the plane ride. So I think there's this profound opportunity actually to rethink the entire business if people take the time to do it and don't just say after the vaccine, oh, let's just slide right back in. Let's just like buckle right back into everything we used to do. But instead they say, oh, what were the lessons over the last 12 months? And let's like jettison all this crap and not do it anymore. And let's take these cool lessons we got and let's build on them. So
I love it. You are spot on. I mean, obviously we're aligned in our view on that. Inertia is powerful, and it stopped, and now we get to restart. And I hope that it's on a different course, taking the best of what we had before, the best of what we have now to scale relationship building much more deeply. Think about the amount of time for one trip by the president to California from MIT. How many hours, right? How many dollars? And if you can repackage that into 30-minute Zoom conversations over that same 3-day period, how many more people can actually get exposure to the direct vision, the direct voice, the direct expressions? And I'm with you. I think it can be better. I don't think it's a trade-off. I think it's actually going to be much, much better if we embrace the moment.
Here's the question, though. The question is, will the leaders, the presidents and the deans, set aside the time? Like when they got on a plane, they were forced, right? It was like, oh, I'm getting on a plane. Now that development shop owns me for 3 days. They're going to fill my calendar for 3 days. Will they give that 3 days over in the same way when they're sitting in their offices in New York, in wherever they are? I mean, so there's like it's not just a learning on the part of the development shops. It's a learning on the part of the leadership of these various organizations that they also have to think differently. And
I think they're going to have to. I read a book recently. One of the takeaways was your calendar reflects your values. They actually said your calendar and your checking account reflect your values. It's one thing to say what you care about, what you believe, what you want to do. It's another thing to look at your calendar. What do you actually do?
Right.
Look at your checking account. What do you actually buy? And I think that leaders obviously have all been forced, right? Just like they were forced to take the 3 days to California, they've now been forced into the Zoom economy. When we're not forced to do that, let's say next year, where will it settle out? But I think that's where it's going to be really important for development leaders to say, look, here's how we need you now, right? We used to need you and that faculty member to go to Chicago to the university club to have XYZ event with those top 100 supporters. Now I need you to send them 15-second iPhone videos letting them know that you care. And that's different, but it's the same spirit. It's just so much more scalable now. I hope that's where we land.
Right. Me too. It'll be very interesting to see.
Kris, if people want to stay in touch with you, if they want to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Email would be great. So
do you have a preferred address that you'd be comfortable sharing?
I do. How would you like me to do that?
Yeah, just share it right now. And we and we'll link to it as well. Okay.
It's Schaefer. So SCHAEFER KG@gmail.com.
Great. And you are on LinkedIn. If you search for Kris Schaefer or Daughter of President, those will be two ways that you can probably track down Kris.
Thanks so much, Brent.
Kris, it has been a privilege to get to know you over the years. Thank you for sharing your perspective and your journey with our audience. Brent signing off from Oceanside with today's episode of the Raise Podcast. Thanks, everyone.